Welcome, everyone. This is our first session of the day, Supported Decision-Making, a Viable Alternative to Guardianship for Students with Disabilities. I'd like to introduce you all to our speakers for this session. We have Kristen Glen, Project Director with Supported Decision-Making New York, Joan Cornachio, Associate Director with Supported Decision-Making New York, and Gina Riley, Program Leader, Clinical Professor with Supported Decision-Making New York. Thank you so much for all being here, and I'm going to turn it over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Nancy. Because we don't have time to go around and do introductions, and I think we probably can't do it on this Zoom anyway, we would be really interested in knowing who's in the audience. I mean, we see your names and we see some of your faces, but we, with most exceptions, don't know who you are. So just a sense of, are you a parent? Are you from a provider organization? Are you an educator? Or are you something else? And if you could just put that in the chat room, then we can kind of check that out and have a sense and maybe aim it a little differently if it's a different audience than we thought. So thank you for that. The next thing I'll say, which I always say, is I have pretty elaborate PowerPoint slides. They're not very fun. They don't jump around and have little animals leap out and do the things that people who are much more tech savvy than I know how to do. But their purpose is really just so that you'll have a record of the presentation, and so you won't have to take notes. And I believe they're available, and so you have them, and so that's the reason for them. And I will try very hard not to read from them, and I tend not to. So let me get started because we have a lot to go through today. First, I want to say something about who Supported Decision-Making New York is. In 2016, we got a grant from DDPC to educate people in New York about the emerging practice of supported decision-making, and also to develop a process for supported decision-making, which we were then supposed to pilot, both with people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. I'm going to say IDD. I hope that doesn't offend anybody, but just for time, to develop the process and then to pilot it with people with IDD who were at risk of guardianship. And as we all know, sort of the entryway to guardianship really is the transition period. That's when the by far largest number of people have guardians appointed for them. So that was a particular focus for us and appropriate for this conference, and also for people who were already subject to guardianship, including many people whose parents had just done it because they were told to do it, but who maybe didn't need it, or who have matured since the guardianship was imposed or whatever. And I should say, given what this conference is, that from the beginning of that grant, wonderful DRNY was our legal partner in this and has done all the legal work with regard to restorations of rights. The 5-year grant would have run out on March 31st of 2021, I'm sorry, 2021. But of course, just as we were finishing our 4th year and we were on target for everything, COVID struck and we were evicted from our building. All of the work that we did was face-to-face, and suddenly we couldn't do any of that. So although we learned a lot during the ensuing year, we did not meet our goals and our targets for all those reasons connected to COVID. And we went back to DDPC and said, look, we really need another year because it isn't really a 6th year, it's really the 5th year. And they said, we think you've done a great job, but no, we don't have any more money. And we told you it was non-renewable. So we were able to get funding from private foundations, primarily Ford, as well as the FAR Fund and the Taft Foundation. And that grant just ran out on March 31st of this year. And I will say that we did reach all of our goals, even as we had promised and so forth. So we're happy about that. But then, and we really never imagined this when we started on this journey in 2016, OPWDD, about whom I know people have many different views, but in this instance, they have been incredibly supportive of supported decision-making from the get-go. They really believe in it. They really want it incorporated in their practice and the practice in this state. And they have given us a very large grant to now design and pilot a statewide service delivery model so that everyone in New York who wants supported decision-making facilitation, which I'll describe a little bit, will have access to it. So we're just starting out. And one of the reasons for saying this is that we are in business. If people are interested in doing facilitation, they can contact us. And we're there and we're free, and DRNY is still our partner, and it's great. Okay, next slide. So what do? We do three different things. The last thing I have there is what I just described, which is this new additional work that we're doing with regard to the service delivery model. And the first is what I said we were doing for the DDPC grant. One of the things that developed out of the DDPC grant and that's built into this new contract is something that I think really excites and interests us in some ways more than anything else. And one of the reasons that we're really excited to be at a conference that's at least, a lot about special education is that we have come to believe that even though the facilitation process that we do is terrific and meaningful and transformative, and everybody who, could do it, should do it, we also recognize that if people with IDD started to learn about making decisions, started to learn about using support in school, early on, I always say in pre-K, start in pre-K, that by the time they were 18 and in transition, they wouldn't need us to be around anymore. They would know how to do it. They would have supporters, and we would be basically out of business, although obviously there's still a lot of older people who wouldn't have gone through the process. So that involved developing and piloting a curriculum, which we hope that schools will use in transition planning. And that's what my colleagues, Joan and Gina, are going to be talking about. I'm just going to run you through as quickly as possible sort of what supported decision-making is, where it comes from, what we do in our process. All of this is going to be too much information for the amount of time we have. So I want also to direct you to our website, which has tons and tons of information. And I'm going to ask Simgay to put the website in the chat room so that you'll have access to it as well. Okay, next slide. So because I think this is titled Supported Decision Making as an Alternative to Guardianship, and that's what we were originally funded for, it's important, I think, to look at what guardianship is so that we understand why supported decision-making is such an important alternative. And here, by way of confession or information or whatever, I should say that sort of the way I got into this was that I was the surrogate in New York County from 2005 to 2012. So I actually did guardianship hearings. And the more I did, the more I thought, why are we taking these people's rights away from them? These people so many of these people could make their own decisions if they just had a little support. And so that's why I'm here. And I'm here because guardianship, at least especially for people with IDD, is a really, really draconian procedure. What it is, and I think often parents don't know this when they're told to get guardianship and they get it is the court taking away from the person with IDD all of the right to make any decision in their life, and giving the legal right to make all those decisions to the guardian. So the person under guardianship has no rights whatsoever, and the person who is the guardian has every right over them. Okay, next. So I said that I was the surrogate in surrogates court doing these hearings, and the hearings were almost, in fact, I think they all were under Article 17A of the Surrogates Court Procedure Act. And this is a statute that was enacted in 1969. Just like put a pin in that, because it was really when we had very different ideas about people with disabilities, and certainly about people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And it's remained basically unchanged since then. And we are one of only 4 or 5 states that has a special guardianship statute for people with IDD. Most states just have a general guardianship statute. We, on the other hand, have a guardianship statute for basically older people who have lost capacity through dementia or whatever, in mental hygiene law, Article 81. So if you've heard these two phrases, Article 81 and Article 17A, Article 81 has lots of procedural protections, lots of constitutional protections. It's relatively recent, it gets changed all the time. 17A is basically what it was in 1969, with all of the thinking that people with IDD, it was a static diagnosis, people couldn't grow, people couldn't learn, they were perpetual children. So as I say, it takes away all rights. You can't tailor it. You can't say, the person can make ordinary medical decisions, but not major medical decisions, as you could under Article 81. It's an all or nothing statute. And it goes on forever unless you come back to court and persuade the surrogate that it is no longer necessary. So it's a pretty serious deprivation of rights, and it goes on forever. Next. So I said that 81 has lots of procedural protections and constitutional imperatives and so forth in it, and 17A doesn't have any. But as with all laws in the United States, there's a sort of a supreme law, the Constitution of the United States, and that's equally true in New York State. And so as a constitutional principle, even though it's not actually in 17A, the law says, or the Constitution is understood as saying, that you cannot impose guardianship if there is a less restrictive alternative that is available. That is literally in Article 81. It is not in 17A. Here are some of the less restrictive alternatives: healthcare proxies, powers of attorneys, SNTs, et cetera. And now really supported decision-making, which is being increasingly recognized as an extremely viable and an extremely preferable alternative to guardianship. And as I said, even though this notion of less restrictive alternative is not in 17A, more and more the surrogates around New York State are actually turning to it in denying petitions for guardianship, saying, wait a minute, I'm looking at this person, I see that, either they are capable of making their own decisions now, or with a little help and a little support they could. I think that that's a less restrictive thing than taking their rights away. And with regard to the work that we've been doing, which I'll describe in a second, people who have gone through the supported decision-making facilitation process, courts are sending people to us, whether it's the guardians ad litem who interview them, whether it's the court clerks in the surrogates' offices, or indeed in several instances, the surrogates themselves go try supported decision-making. So that's the kind of legal framework that supported decision-making is in right now. So the big question is, what is it? This is what I always call the fancy definition. It's by an academic, but I think it's very useful because it indicates a couple of things. One is that it can take many forms. It can be more or less formal or informal. But at the end of the day, it is always about helping a person with ID make their own decisions and communicating those decisions to other people in the world. So that's at its heart. It's enabling people with IDD to make their own decisions with the support of trusted people in their lives. Next. So as I said, what I liked about the definition is that it suggests that there can be many different ways. And in fact, long before we ever started using the term supported decision-making, which is as recent as about 2012 in this country, people with IDD have been living in the community, making decisions, going to work, going to their programs, going to school, doing whatever, and getting support from others, from family members, from providers, from teachers, from friends, et cetera. Never called it supported decision-making, but they're getting support, and that's great. Then there is a more informal, there is a less informal than that, in which people make a supported decision-making agreement, a sort of contract. But as in a number of states, not here, these forms are sort of available. People can do them, whether they know what they're signing, whether they're clear about what it means to make a decision or not is sort of up for grabs, I think, but people can do it. They can make their own agreements. So those agreements will not have any legal power. And then finally, there's a more formalized way of making a supported decision-making between the person with IDD, who I will right now say we call the decision maker to indicate their centrality to the process, So a supported decision-making agreement made between the decision maker and their chosen supporters through a facilitation process. And that's the very process that we developed under the DDPC grant, as we were supposed to do. And I'll say a little bit when I talk a little bit about international human rights, about how that was helpful to us. And finally, the most formal of all is when the state, through law, recognizes these supported decision-making agreements and says, if a person with IDD has an SDMA of an approved sort and makes a decision with it, then third parties like healthcare providers, financial institutions, landlords, et cetera, must accept the decisions that the person with IDD makes. They can't say, no, I'm sorry, I don't think you have capacity to make this decision. You need a guardian. A statute avoids that problem. Okay, next slide. So where does this come from? I think the main place that it comes from really is our common experience of how everybody makes decisions. And I'm going to go through that in a second, but I do want to say here the human right of every person to make their own decisions. And that's so important that even though we don't have a lot of time, I'm going to come back to it in a second, but let's go to our common experience. Next. So this is, if we had more time and we were all in a room together, I could ask people to talk about decisions they've made. I think with regard to the curriculum that Joan and Gina are going to talk about, they'll be doing this more. So I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. But if you just think about it, whenever you make a big decision or even a little decision, you will often seek support of one kind or another. You'll consult your friends, you'll ask your family. If it's like your tax, you make a decision about paying taxes, you talk to your accountant. If it's a medical thing, you talk to your doctor, you do research. And remember, every time you do research, you're actually getting support from whoever did the research that you're now looking at. So everybody does it. And it's really important to think about that because it normalizes the process of decision-making so that we recognize that people with IDD are doing exactly the same thing that we do every day. We use support and so do they, but they just may need a little more or different kinds of support than we do in our daily lives. Okay, next. So this I think is the most important slide. And I think it sort of gets repeated in Joan and Gina's presentation, but we learned this from people who were doing supported decision-making around the world, that these are the kinds of support that people may need. But then we also learned through research here that there is a whole new cottage industry of people who are teaching, not people with IDD, but people at the highest levels of industry and healthcare and the military and so forth about how to make good decisions. And it turns out that these steps are exactly the same. These are the steps that go into making decisions. And these are the places that you might or might not get or might not need support. And I'm not going to go through them now. Again, I think Joan and Gina are, but you might want to go back to this and you might want to think about decisions that you've made and see how this plays out. Okay. So why is supported decision-making a good alternative to guardianship? Well, first of all, if someone is not put under guardianship, they don't lose their rights. So they still get to decide where they're going to live, who their friends are, they get to vote, they get to work without having a guardian sign contracts for them, they get to get married without anybody saying you can't because you're a person with a developmental or intellectual disability. The next one is a really important point. People learn from making decisions, both good and bad. If we were all in a room where I could see you all on the screen, I would ask you to put up your hand if you've never made a bad decision. And I am guessing that there would be no hands up. And if there were a hand, I don't think we'd want to know that person because their life would be so constrained. We learn from our mistakes. So if a person never gets to make decisions, never has consequences from their decisions, they don't learn. And therefore they don't grow. The next thing, and this is very important because people care a lot when they talk about guardianship, about protection. And I don't have a lot of time to go into my sort of critique of people believing that guardianship provides protection when it really doesn't, or at least we don't have any evidence that it does. But what supported decision-making does do in terms of protection is it creates a network of supporters who are very committed to the decision maker in a relationship of not just support, but also of respect. And there's always more than one. So there's always what I call many eyes watching. And if something starts to go wrong, or even a supporter starts to heavy up or engage in undue influence or whatever, there are other people there who are watching it in real time and who can take action to stop it. So the network of supporters is really important in terms of protection. And then finally, because there's a human right to make your own decisions, and supported decision-making lets you do that, and guardianship doesn't. Okay, next. So I've said what I've said about supported decision-making as an alternative, but nobody says it better than our decision makers. And so I want you to hear from Jessica, and I want you to know in advance, Jessica wrote her statement. She is more comfortable reading it than speaking it or trying to memorize it or whatever. So please understand, this is Jessica, and this is what she has to say, unprompted by us, about supported decision-making and guardianship.
Hello, my name is Jessica. I'm here to tell you about supported decision-making and what it means to me and many other people with disabilities in New York State. Have you ever made a wrong decision? One where you think back and say, oops, that was the wrong thing to do. Like getting a parking ticket. How did you move forward? Did you learn from it? Or did you stop making decisions altogether? I doubt that. I'm here to tell you that the possibility of making a bad decision or a good decision at all is a privilege, one that I want and deserve to have in my life. You can see a person with a disability under guardianship cannot make any decisions, good or bad ones. The mere possibility of making a bad decision strips us of our right to live a full life. A person's life is a collection of experiences, all kinds of them. And I am just like any other person. I want to live it all. Living a full life means that I deserve to have dignity of making a mistake. The chance that I could sometimes forget my umbrella on a rainy day must not mean that I should never be allowed to walk outside. Supported decision-making empowers me to take ownership of my life. It solidifies my connection to a group of people who want to see me move forward. They are not there to hold me back or warn me at every turn. They are there to help me get all the information I need in a way that I can best understand, and ultimately support me in the decisions I make. In my case, it also means that my closest caregivers see me thrive with the support of others. They don't always have to be there for me to give me confidence. They know that I can stand on my own even when they are not there available to me. I've done the work of developing these supportive relationships. It is not only right that I can benefit from these deep connections. My team of supporters trust me to be able to make decisions. They believe in my goals and in my capacity to understand choices and take risks. I am a passionate advocate for people with disabilities. I work for the Self-Advocacy Association of New York State and AHRC Nassau. I want to tell others like me that they deserve to be the architects of their life. That needing help from others does not mean that they are not capable of making their own decisions. Supported decision-making is a transformational program that makes me feel excited about my future. It helps me take ownership of everything I do. It pushes me to build critical thinking skills. And most importantly, it allows me to be fully contributing member of society. An inclusive world that truly supports people with disabilities has to let people live life the way they want, to go on their own terms with the support they need to do so.
So like I said, much better than I could ever say it. Next slide, if we can get to the next slide. So I want to say something. She's talking about supported decision-making as a process. And I want to talk very, very, very briefly about the importance of supported decision-making agreements if the legislation that is currently sitting in the assembly, and you could ask questions about that later, is passed. And that is this whole issue of third parties who often are prejudiced or biased against people, or just ignorant about people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, or who are afraid of liability, afraid, you know, a parent is going to come back and sue them later or whatever. So the purpose of the supported decision-making agreement legally is that it prevents, as I say, third parties from discriminating against people with disabilities and refusing to accept their decisions because of their disability, and it requires them to, you know, deal with them just as they would with everybody else. And already we have SDMA statutes in 14 states and the District of Columbia. There is a really excellent supported decision-making statute that is currently pending in the legislature, in the assembly. We'll put some information about that if you have any interest in either looking at it or commenting on it to your assembly member or whatever before the session is over, which is 16 days from now. Okay, next. So quickly, human rights. I'm not going to talk about human rights a lot. They've been important in our practice because when we started doing this in 2016, we were not starting from scratch. There is an international United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which you'll see a piece of in a second. And starting in about 2008, when it came into effect, various groups, civil society groups, NGOs, and sometimes the government itself around the world, literally around the world, began experimenting with this and began developing ways to help people use supported decision-making. And we drew on those pilots. Every one of those pilot projects used one form or another of a facilitation process. And so we had a real head start, even though obviously the conditions in every country, every state, whatever, are very different. So we have a lot of people behind us, and a lot of people who are actually at this moment looking to us in terms of our legislation and what we've been doing. Human rights are based in three principles: equality, non-discrimination. Both of those are going to sound familiar, obviously, from you know, our constitution, our sense of our constitutional law, our sense of statutes like the ADA, but also in something that doesn't appear in any of those, which is dignity. And the importance of dignity, I think, cannot be overestimated. And it is at the very heart of this right to make and have your own decisions legally recognized. Next slide. I just want to show you how important this is as a human rights issue. Right at the very front of the convention is this general principle of the respect for the inherent dignity and individual autonomy of everyone, including, and so dignity includes the freedom to make one's own choices. It is a component of dignity. It's a component of respect. Next. So this slide is the provision in the CRPD, the Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, that speaks about everyone's right to legal capacity, which is the right not only to make your own decisions, but to have them legally recognized. That's what the SDMA statute that's pending would do. But it also says that the state needs to provide people with disability with the support that they need to exercise that. And that's where supported decision-making, as we talk about it now, comes from. Okay, next slide. So this is just a quick slide to show that, you know, starting when we first started talking about it in 2012 until today, there's just, it's just swept the field. And it's astounding to me how quickly this has happened. But everybody from the American Bar Association to the National Guardianship Association has come out and said, this is an emerging practice. This is a viable practice. This is a good alternative to guardianship for the people for whom it will work. We don't say that supported decision-making is for everybody. We recognize that guardianship may still be appropriate for some people, but I would certainly argue, and I think many others would, that it's necessary for many fewer people than we have thought in the past, and supported decision-making is appropriate for many more people than we would have thought of, 20 years ago. Next. So this is very quickly about what we do in the event that you are interested and you're a parent or you're a care manager or whatever. This is our process. It's a process that takes about 14 meetings of about an hour in length, just because people always ask how long it would take. It is a 3-phase process. And here is the cast of characters. There's the person with IDD, who I've already said is the decision maker. There is a facilitator who has been trained over 2 or 3 days, has a 120-page manual, has tons of materials. In our pilot project, always was a volunteer. That will not necessarily be true in the statewide delivery system. And has access to, and in fact, must communicate with a mentor after every meeting with the decision maker, every meeting in all 3 phases. The mentor is a very experienced facilitator, and the mentor meets with the facilitator after every meeting. The mentor is there to problem solve, and both facilitators and mentors are parts of a community of practice, so they meet monthly or bi-monthly to talk about best practices and so forth. So it's a growing iterative process of doing this job really well. And then the last people in the process are, of course, the supporters, the trusted people in the decision maker's life, who they have chosen to give them support in particular kinds of decisions. Okay, next. So what we're doing in the facilitation process is identifying and fleshing out what we call the big 4, which is the areas in which the decision maker wants to get support. I mean, here are some obvious ones, but there are many other obvious ones, including housing, community services, et cetera, et cetera. And these are what the particular decision maker identifies as areas. Who they want to support. These are the trusted people. For transition age youth, inevitably, they are parents and family members, but also they could be teachers, they could be the football coach, they could be a next door neighbor, they could be another relative, who's as far away as, I think we have one in Buenos Aires, we have some in Canada, we have some in California. They're the trusted people in the person's lives, and there can be more than one supporter for an area, et cetera, et cetera. Then the kinds of support they want, and this is again that list of the 6 steps of decision making. They might be really good at gathering information, because so many of these young people are just whizzes on the computer, but understanding it might be more difficult for them. So that might be where they need some support in a particular area. And then finally, how they want to get the support. This is just, do they want to meet with their supporters by Zoom? Do they want to talk on the phone? Do they want to have an in-person meeting? Do they want everybody together, et cetera? All of this is what the decision maker chooses. It's going to be what goes into the supported decision-making agreement. And throughout the course of the 3-phase process, it changes. It gets richer, things get added, things get taken away. It's an iterative process, and it is also intended to be a process that ends with a decision-making agreement that the decision maker can change over the course of their life by changing areas or by adding or subtracting supporters or whatever. Next. So here are the 3 phases. I'm not going to say anything more about them, except that the first phase is the facilitator working with the decision maker. The second is the facilitator working with the supporters who've been identified. The decision maker may be there or not be there as they choose. Be there for some, sometimes when there are families with divorces, the decision maker will say, I don't want to be in the same room with my mom and dad and have them argue. So let's have them meet separately, and obviously the facilitator will do that. And then after the supporters are really on board and understand what it means to support, what it means to respect the decision maker as an adult capable of making their own decisions, rather than saying, I know best, but that's not in your best interest, dear, or all the ways that we tend to be paternalistic about our kids until they fight their way out of it. Once they're on board with that, then we move to phase 3. And because I'm a lawyer, I think of this as the contract negotiation. The facilitator, the decision maker, and the supporters sit around a table. Now it's sort of a virtual table, but a table, and they negotiate the SDMA. And it's the subjects in the big 4 things get changed, new areas may get added, somebody may drop out as a supporter, they may think of somebody who would be a better supporter, for example, with regard to finance. And at the end, when they're finally all in agreement, an agreement is drafted, we have a template just to make it easier for people, but it is always, the content is always the content of what the decision maker and their supporters have agreed to put in it. Next. So the next 3 slides are more detailed descriptions of the phases that I don't have time to do, but that's why you have these slides. And very quickly, the purpose of this, and I've already said some of it, I mean, part of it is we got to the end of the facilitation process. It was successful. You've got an agreement. You know what it means to make a decision. You know what it means to ask for support. Your supporters know what it means to give support, and what the limitations on what they're supposed to be doing are. And for almost everybody, it's a time for celebration. I know we have at least one mom of a successful decision maker here. Maybe she'll say something about that later. It formalizes the agreement. It's in writing. So if people forget what they agreed to, there it is. If there are any misunderstandings, as I've already said, it allows for flexibility. The decision maker may really develop a lot of capacity in a particular area and not need support anymore, or there may be a new area. You know, they were 18 when they signed it and now they're 27 and they're thinking about getting married. And so maybe they want some support around that, or support about, you know, should they start a family? So that's all changeable. And obviously supporters could age out or get sick or die or not be available, and new people will come into the DM's life. And so this agreement is a flexible document that can change as the decision maker grows. It obviously shows that there's a less restrictive alternative in place. And then, as I've said, with regard to the statute, and there's the bill number, if people make decisions with SDMAs, then third parties can't discriminate against them. Next. So as I've said, it's an ongoing process. That's what it is. It's transformative. I think Jessica said that herself. We didn't tell her to. It is, people really change in doing it. The decision makers grow, the supporters, I think, grow too and change in their relationships to the decision maker. The facilitators all say that it's changed them. What it does for the decision maker, in addition to giving them this agreement, is really an increased sense of self-determination and confidence. So the process itself has enormous value. And then, as I've already said, the agreement has value in and of itself. Next. I've really outstayed. So this is another little video that we would ordinarily play. I am running out of time and I don't want to cut into Gina and Joan. I will have Simgay put the link to this video. This is a mom who just talks about how this worked for her son and for her family, how she and the other supporters saw him grow, how it changed their relationships, how happy they were. Again, she says it way better than I could, and probably more credibly. We just don't have time. But Simgay will put the link to Beth, who is the mom here. And let's just get to the very end. So yeah, so this is the segue into Joan and Gina. As I said, so that's our process. That's what we do. If you want, you know, your child or someone that you work with and you think supported decision-making facilitation would be useful, you can contact us and we will do it. But we are also really interested in getting this into the school curriculum, teaching people how to make decisions, teaching people what it means to get support, and teaching supporters what it means to give support. And so we developed this curricular project in which we've been working with the Cook School to develop a 10-session curriculum on decision-making and support. The first iteration was in the fall. There was one session for people who are actually in transition, that is to say the 18 to 21-year-olds, and one for recent graduates. And we are repeating that this semester. We're about halfway through it, again with the 2 groups. Cook is going to be doing an evaluation. There'll be one more iteration in the fall, and then hopefully we'll have something that we can take to schools through the Cook Institute and through our contacts with boards of ed and so forth, and see whether this is something that can be incorporated into the transition curriculum, so that even if people choose not to do facilitation, they will be better decision makers and better able to use support. And their parents and families will understand that this is a good alternative to guardianship. So with that, I turn it over to Gina and Joan, and I'm really sorry if I cut into your time.
Okay, yeah, so I'm Joan, and I'll speak a little bit, and then Gina about the overview of the curriculum and what we've been doing with the Cook transition students and the alums, and then Gina will take it away with some great examples so that you go away from this hopefully with some good visuals of how this actually works in practice. Thanks, Chris, for segueing into the curriculum. So I'll just jump right in and say one of the reasons we have two discrete groups is that alums ostensibly have a little more experience in the room and in the world, that is, having been out a little bit longer out of school, as it were, past 21. So the alums range in age from 22 to 26, I believe. And the students are in the transitions program, 18 to 21-year-olds. Interestingly enough, as we know, every group of students, every constellation is quite different. And in the fall, what we had experienced was that the alum group was indeed more experienced in the world, and the transition students were a little more recalcitrant, trying to figure out who they were as decision makers. And it's fascinating because in our spring iteration, where Gina, I think, would corroborate this, that it's actually quite different. The students in the transitions program seem to be really kind of keyed into this whole idea of being a decision maker. So, well, the alums are a little bit not as it was just a little less experienced. It's very interesting how that works. So never judging, never expecting or coming in with assumptions about a particular group. So starting with the basic questions of what does it mean to be a decision maker? And having people call out, I'm Joan, I'm a decision maker, and the power in using those words. And then what does that actually mean? So the focus of the class is talking about the choices. So breaking it down, choices first, how choices lead to decisions. So very simple examples of showing slides of if you had an opportunity, here's a slide of a mountain, here's a slide of a seaside, where would you go and why? Slides of puppy, cat, lizard. If you wanted a pet and you wanted to choose one, which would you choose and why? Those choices leading to decisions, and then bigger life decisions that ultimately come out of those small choices every day. I'm reminded myself at the moment of a parent that was on, a supporter that was on our call just the other day and kind of stopped us and said, is there any assessment for my son to be part of this? And I said, nope. If he wants to be a decision maker, he can be a decision maker. And then I directed or addressed the question to her son. I said, Dennis, how would you feel about other people making all your decisions in the world? And he right away said, I want to make my own decisions. I said, there's your assessment, Mom. So it's sort of tongue in cheek, but in the sense that this is what it's all about. What does it mean to be a decision maker? And we talk about the different kinds of decisions we make, considered choices that lead to decisions versus impulsive decisions. And I don't think there's anyone in this conversation that would say, oh, I consider my decisions all the time, right? We all make impulsive choices. And in fact, sometimes it's a good plan, right? You've got to run for the train and you're going to run for that train. You're not going to think about, oh my goodness, I didn't get my cup of coffee. I'm running for the train. That's what I have to do right now. The child's in the road. I've got to grab that kid and get that kid out of the road. And sometimes it's just appropriate. I really feel like a salad today. I'm not even going to think about my other options. I want a salad. So lots of scaffolding of decisions, especially when we're talking about getting to the larger important decisions in life. And what I want to focus my being mindful of the time, my conversation with you about is introducing you to how we map out decisions. And I'm going to leave it to Gina to talk about, because Gina's really an expert in the concepts of intrinsic motivation, that we're working from that place of intrinsic motivation to enhance the the self-determination and autonomy of people with disabilities as they emerge into the world. So that's just a little taste, because I know Gina is wonderful at talking about those things. Without further ado, I'd like to share with you this, we call it the decision-making mapping tool. No, I'm sharing the wrong thing. I'm so sorry. That is not what I was going to share. Those are just some notes of mine. Sorry about that. Just shows that no matter how many times one shares, the issues that can come up. Also not having a large laptop. Okay, we're good now, right? Thanks. Okay, so Chris talked about this before. The idea that social scientists have studied how we make decisions, right? And there's 6 or 7 different ways in which people, generally speaking, go about their decision making. So the first slide shows gathering information, right? Interesting that Chris mentioned before the idea of, oh, somebody could be really good at going on the internet and doing, their own research, but might need support for the understanding of information. I agree. Interestingly enough, I just want to give you a little anecdote about a young man I was working with who said, when I said to him, you seem really great with your research, Lewis. And he said, I still feel like I need support with that because there are lots of search engines. You don't know who wrote what you're reading on the internet. And I might need support for sifting through the reams of information that's going to come at me. So I just thought that was, an extraordinary response to my my assumption that he perhaps didn't want support in gathering his information. Understanding information, okay, weighing one's choices, thinking about the consequences of the decisions, choosing among options, communicating decision. It's written in the first person because we're doing this with the decision makers. Communicate my decisions to others, and then help carrying out what I decided to do. And I say that because we can all have the best plans in the world. An example I've used recently is I want to exercise more. I might need support to be reminded, to be coached, to be encouraged by my husband. Get out, and you said you were going to take a long walk this afternoon. Do it. And then the last one being, not showing up right here, doing what I decided, and that feeling of, yes, I followed through on my decision. So we use this tool as a way to talk about our decision making. And we've given examples in class based on interest of the students of want to go on vacation, want to get a pet. We want to go out to lunch today as a group from Cook. And so we, gone through simple examples like that, and kind of fun examples, to more weighted examples that then feed into a big 4 chart, which shows the kinds of decisions in terms of health decisions, money, perhaps, relationships, access to things in the community. I'm not going to show all of these right now. I'm just giving you an idea. So we work into, very kind of common kinds of decision making into the actual domains of life that we all deal with in our decision making. I would think that most of us here want support for decisions related to healthcare, money management. Chris often uses the example of, I don't do my own taxes. I have an accountant to do that, right? I use examples all the time from my own life as a way of really helping folks understand this is a normal part of life. We all need support for our decision making in different areas. The last thing I wanted to bring up, and then I'm going to pass it over to Gina so that she can give you some examples, because this all feels like just talk until you really see it in action. And I hope we'll have some questions that we can, would love to save some time to dialogue with you at the end. One of the big things that we have talked about with the students is this idea of dignity of risk, and taking apart those words, dignity and risk, and what do those mean to you? And one of the best descriptions of dignity came to us from a student who said, Well, dignity for me means respect. And we talked about that quite a bit. And the idea of what does it mean to take risk? And risk is not necessarily a bad or a dangerous thing. And we find after, so I would be remiss if I hadn't said that these conversations happen with the students in a peer setting, so that they really have the experience of supporting one another as they learn to be decision makers, and learn what it means to be a decision maker. And after the first 7 weeks, then we bring in supporters. Usually it ends up being a parent. Remember, this is not a full out facilitation process that would take months to just get through the first phase of exploring all of the big 4 steps of which areas, what kind of support, and who the supporters will be, and how the support will happen. This is an experience of a phase 1 facilitation process in a group setting to give the decision makers the opportunity to work together, to brainstorm, to come up with different ideas, to play with examples, to discuss risk, to discuss consequences being both good outcomes and bad outcomes. As one student also said to us, a consequence is just something that happens after, not good or bad, right? And then we bring in the supporters, and Gina and I promise I'm going to pass it right over to you now, Gina, have just started with the supporters in the week that just happened, this past Monday. So we had our first group with supporters. We'll have 2 more sessions with them. And we've taken the supporters through this idea of what is good support? What does it mean to be supported yourselves, mom or dad? Forget about your loved one for the moment. Think about yourself. We all need support. And again, normalizing this concept and then scaffolding it for supporters around the mapping tools so that folks can really understand, I can break this down. I can make sense of this if I don't look at it as, oh my goodness, my loved one with a DD is going to be out in the world and has to make decisions. That can be a very overwhelming concept for a parent, but being able to break it down into, let's talk about your options. Would you like to weigh those options with me? Do we need to go back and understand a little more of this information? By the way, I have 2 kids. My younger child has a developmental disability. We've done a lot of mapping of decision making with her. My son is in his mid-30s, and I've done this with him in a way to just sort of give a sense, again, of normalization of the concept of decision making. I'm going to pass it over to Gina so we don't completely run out of time. Thanks, Gina.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. So I'm so excited to show you some of the materials we have been working on in our Cook SDMNY collaboration. And I love that we're seeing a lot of people from school districts here. And if you are from a school district and you are interested in this, please contact us, because I think it's really, really important for all students, not only students with disabilities, to know how to make decisions. I'll also say all of our curriculum works on the tenets of intrinsic motivation and self-determination. So we're constantly thinking about 3 things. We're constantly thinking about raising our students' level of competence or confidence in themselves as decision makers, as well as giving them opportunities for autonomy, for freedom of choice. We talk a ton in this curriculum about choices. And then lastly, we always want to really facilitate a sense of relatedness in our students, or a sense that there are supporters that they have, and those people support them no matter what, no matter if they make good decisions or poor decisions. How many of us are perfect people? None of us, right? So everyone makes good and bad decisions sometimes, but that you'll always have support in your decisions. So I'm so excited to show you some of our curriculum and some of what we've been doing with the students. So you'll see that we use a lot of visuals with the students. Students love visuals. We talk about, what's happening here, right? What choices has this individual made? And our students will say, well, he's wearing shorts and it's snowing. And we're like, well, what are the ramifications of that decision? And so they talk about, well, he might be cold and it's a long walk. And we think through that. I think another one of the pieces of curriculum that our decision makers really love is this picture of a student looking at their phone late in the night, right? This is something all of us do sometimes. So this is a choice, right? You take your phone out, it's late, you should be in bed, but the web is so interesting. And so what are the ramifications of that choice? So just going through different sort of choices and decisions that one can make. So we start off there. The second thing we start talking about, right, is we start exploring decisions a little more. And so we start asking questions like, what are easy decisions for me? So it could be something like deciding what to have for lunch, or to exercise, or to go to activities, or picking out clothes, or what color to paint fingernails. And then we start thinking about, what are hard decisions for me? And our students are really honest with us. They talk about, deciding what to do after transition, deciding what college they want to go to, deciding what workshops they want to go to, whether to get up early, stay in bed, deciding where to live. So we get into these really important decisions. And then we start talking about support. What are decisions I need support for? Who is going to help? And so we go through this process of really thinking about decisions, thinking about what decisions are easy or hard, and then thinking about the nature of support and what that really means. So we've done a lot of activities with our students about what good support looks like. Right? So you'll see here, it's, what does support mean to you? What does it mean to give support? And what does it mean to receive support? And throughout, you'll notice these are all in different colors. The student has chosen their color, right? The student has chosen their words. And if you look at this, this is an amazing brainstorm of what support really is. One of our students said, support allows for more independence. And then we asked, well, how? Or support makes us creative. Support is helpful and makes me feel good. Support is like learning. It's like school, you're learning every day, right? And then what does it feel to get support? Well, it makes me feel happy because I always have my mom. Or it means you're trying and you are able to be empowered to do something that you might not be able to do. And so these students, right, some of whom are pretty, in terms of spectrum, pretty severe, really understand what support is and what it feels like to give good support and to receive good support. We've also talked with parents and guardians and friends and the decision makers, chosen supporters about support. And we generally, when supporters come into the mix, ask the following questions. We ask things like, what does good support look like? What types of support can encourage more independence? How do we provide protection while also encouraging independence? And as Joan said, what is dignity of risk? And how can we sort of weigh that in thinking about how our young adults can be safe? And we have these questions, with the supporters and the decision makers. So everyone is sort of brainstorming together on what support looks like, what it feels like, what it means, and how it might be different from protection per se. I want to show you one more thing and then I'll show you a big four chart, but we've talked about support like a team. And I think this was really an interesting brainstorm, right? Some kids like baseball, football, right? So we talked about support like a team. Who is Team Aless, right? Who are the people on her team? And what messages do those people give her? We also ask about different qualities of supporters. And I'm always amazed at the insight of our decision makers, right? And this is all from their mouths. They said supporters are good listeners. They're honest, they're truthful, they're friendly. They're people who I work with and that know me well. They're people that are easy to talk to or that I feel comfortable talking to. So again, this is the amazing conversations that we have with our decision makers. Yes, it's a great place to start in terms of any sort of planning, right? Like, what is support? Where does it come from? And then we do group work, and our group work is really always very insightful. And we use a tool that SDMNY uses in their facilitation protocol called the Big Four, but we use it a little differently. We talk about the different decisions that students might have to make, whether it be in healthcare or work or money. We talk about the different types of support and how to make decisions. And then we think about who might be supportive in those decisions. So as you can see, I mean, I think we've done two rounds of this. And in each round, we're getting more nuanced and we're creating newer materials and we're making different lesson plans. And students and parents and guardians and their supporters have been really excited about the process. So thank you so much for your time. I'm so excited to be able to for you to see these amazing pieces of curriculum and what our students have done. And I think now we can open it up to questions. So you can either unmute and ask your question, or you can put your question in the chat and we'll navigate that as well. And thanks, everyone. Okay, so the first question comes from Janie, and then I'll answer Krista's question. So what school district has adopted the transition decision-making curriculum, the curriculum available to supporters, book recommendations? Okay, so this is like a three-layered question. Medford School District has created this amazing article, and I'll link it in the chat, on curriculum for thinking about decisions and support. We have been working with the Cook School, but our hope is that we really enhance this, that we spread it to D75 schools. And our hope is always, New York City DOE takes it and grabs a hold of it, because again, this is curriculum that everyone needs. As a program coordinator of the Adolescent Special Education program at Hunter College, my students have absorbed this curriculum. They love it. They use it with their own students. So we hope to make the curriculum more widely available. In terms of book recommendations on this to use at home, that's a really good question and something we should probably be working on, right? But I will say there's lots of books on decision-making, but the decision-making materials that are on the supported decision-making website are a great place to start. We've had our students look at the videos on the website. We've talked to them about decision-making. So do go through our website at sdmny.org and really look at those materials, because those materials are a great place to start. Curriculum be available online. Again, this is our only second iteration of this curriculum, and so we're refining it every day. So soon, Joan and I have been so excited about this project and really developing curriculum for this, and we're so glad you're excited too.
And I'll just jump in and say, Gina, that thinking about the first and the second iteration and how far the curriculum has actually grown and developed from the fall to the spring session. Not that the fall curriculum was a bad curriculum, but we're learning all of the time from the students and what is really needed. And Gina and I have spent a lot of time brainstorming and reflecting and refining how we're doing this. So, it's alive, it's so dynamic and fluid and really wonderful.
Yeah, I think the answer is no. No, it's not anywhere. We designed this based on our experience of developing the process for facilitation, which is we start out with an idea, we try it, we find out some of it works, some of it doesn't work. Then we incorporate what works, we try it again, we learn something new. We learned a lot about support in the fall. Then we try it again. We're having an evaluation of this semester. So our plan is that by the end of the fall iteration, we'll have a package. And then that package will be available any ways that you want to access it. The Cook Institute, we know, does all sorts of training and whatever, they'll have it. So it'll be out there, but we're not done yet. And we really want to have a good package. When Gina mentioned Medford, it's in Massachusetts. It's not here, obviously, and they've done sort of one iteration. They've done some really interesting stuff that I know Joan and Gina have incorporated. So that's what there is. You're going to have to wait a little bit longer, but there's nothing to stop people from talking about how you make decisions and the 6 steps. You know, that's something that anybody can do. That's why I said put a pin in this slide, right? So the question is there a difference between supporting a bad decision and supporting a person dealing with the consequences? Oh, yes.
Great question.
I mean, if you're a supporter, you give support in the way that's asked. You help people understand the information if that's what you're supposed to do. One of the is, are there alternatives to this? This doesn't have to be the only choice. But if a person makes a bad choice, and this is right in the SDMA and it's right where what the supporters sign, I will support you regardless of whether you take my advice or do what I say. And that means, I guess being there and cleaning up, just like we do for our neurotypical children, right? Who never sign these agreements. And then hope to be helpful presences who allow people to reflect on why it wasn't a good decision and how they might make a better decision next time. That's the dignity of risk.
But I would, and I would add to that, it's such a good question, that I think some of the same tools and strategies that we're using with folks to get to making a decision can be useful when you're dealing with the fallout of the consequences, right? Let's go back and let's review. Let's talk, if the person is willing to do that. And we always talk about there's really no bad decision if you've learned from that decision. So can you go back and recap how you gathered the information? What information did you actually use? What made you choose that option, et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a lot of different answers to that question. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Nancy. I see Nancy's message in the chat. So thank you. Thank you all.
Yes, thank you. Come to our website. If you have people who you think would benefit from this, contact us. We're open for business. And hopefully we'll have a curriculum by January of next year. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you to our captioner. We will send you out all the information, and there will be a link to the evaluation. It's in the chat now if you want to copy it down, but we will email it to you as well. We really appreciate your support and sharing how you found our session today, and I hope that you learned a lot. And thank you to our speakers for really supporting people to make the decisions that they want to make. And that's so important to us at DRNY as well, and the Special Ed Task Force. Thank you, guys. Have a wonderful day.